Hey everybody, welcome back to classes here at Sunnyside for 2022. I'm Trevor Cameron, our general manager here. So hi to Nicole, she's in the background.
Good morning.
She always has the pretty flowers behind her. I get the palette wall. And we have our special guest here again, Mr. Steve Smith, the Whistling Gardener. Ask him all kinds of hard questions during the class. He's in there on the computer. You can't see him, but you can talk to him on the chat. So just a reminder, hopefully everybody had a great holidays. Happy New Year 2022. The sun is out here. It's a beautiful day at Sunnyside Nursery in Marysville. Keep an eye on the questions on the chat. If you're going to ask some things during class, I'll be here plenty of time after. I work all weekend. You come up here and ask me what you like, but give Steve some hard ones on the chat here during the class. That'll keep us going. So hopefully everybody got the handout, the 5-page biography that it is. You can tell I like writing too much sometimes, but hopefully that'll help you as you're looking through some pruning here this winter. This is always kind of a kickoff class for us every January, and typically we just talk pruning, general pruning. We're going to do some of that, of course, but I thought this year we'd kind of gear this towards fruit and berries a little bit more. A lot of folks ask too many questions probably in the fruit class and the berry class coming up here. We don't have enough time to cover all of it, so we'll do some general pruning here today. We'll talk a little bit specifically about fruit, allow you to ask some questions. You can certainly ask about anything you like for pruning, but we'll try to focus on a little bit more of fruit and berries. So you'll get listening to me talking here during the class, but we'll also have a nice slideshow. I'll show you some pictures. I found some old school little black and white diagrams. We can look retro and look at all the different buds and maybe hopefully help you kind of understand the basics of pruning a little bit. Okay, so first of all, we always need the right tools for the right job, keep them sharp. So I'll show you some pictures in the slideshow, some basic pruning tools. I brought a couple from my house to show you, make your life easier. If we've got the right tool, the job's going to be a lot easier. So I'll show you kind of a few of my favorites. Folding saws, use a lot of these at my own house. This is a large one. I didn't bring my pocket saw as my favorite tool. It's a little miniature version of that. We sell them here at the store. If you want to find little surgical tool, that's a great little saw to get into real tight little spots, especially on the fruits, the berries, and really all plants in the yard. We can do very accurate cuts without having to use a big lopper and trying to find some leverage there in the middle of an old plant. So a good folding saw always helps. Maybe something you haven't seen is, sharpener. We don't like to pull out the grinder once a week and sharpen all our tools. This is a great sharpener made by Zenport. We sell it here at the nursery. I can pull my pruners out here, stick my blade on the cutter, and I can sharpen these virtually instantly all the time without having to do a lot of work. Got a little screw cap. I can keep some oil in there to lubricate them. But that's an excellent purchase if you're looking for a tool. That's a great little sharpener. It's a popular purchase around here at Sunnyside to use as well. I'll show you two more real quick, but a good pair of loppers. Now, I mentioned I'm not a huge lopper guy in a lot of spots in the yards. You can go at gigantic loppers. This is what we would call a mini or vine lopper. This is an excellent one for what we're talking about today. Berries, blueberries, some vines, a little bit of fruit pruning, roses. It's a great one for. Much smaller. I don't need as much leverage. I can get into a smaller space. And this is a great high quality one from Zenport. Again, lasts you a lifetime. Aluminum, nice and lightweight, but very nice blades. You keep that sharp, that'll be a tool you'll have forever. Last one is pole pruner. Now, this is the one out of my garage. You can see the difference in this pole pruner. I've still got the pulley system, but I've got chain, not rope. The pulley I can replace easily. My problem with pole pruners was always breaking the rope that was the loop inside of here. This is a much heavier duty one. Again, for a typical homeowner, I don't know that you'll ever replace that again, but I can get up a good 15, 16 feet and able to do some lopping and pruning up in my tree without having to spend so much in hiring arborists. So we get you comfortable with some pruning techniques today. Certainly take a look at the tools you have in your own shop or garage and maybe supplement them a little bit with some new ones. And again, make your life a little bit easier with the tools. Now, this year, I'm going to talk real quickly about weather because I have a feeling if it's not been asked already, someone's going to inevitably ask Mr. Smith here during class or me after. I lucked out in my yard, and after this Arctic blast and all the snow we had, I got black leaves, I got dieback, I got this, I got that. You know, I'm raising my hand. Me too. You know, I live right in Everett. And with how cold we got a couple of weeks back right after Christmas and the amount of snow, all those tender things that we've kind of got in the habit of planting, zone 7, zone 8 material, you know, rosemaries. I had some vaccinium damage. A lot of broadleaf stuff will need some pruning and some cleanup. Plants are resilient creatures. Don't rush out now and go cut it back to the ground or do anything drastic. Wait until we get to the end of winter here after frost, and then we'll be able to cut these things back, keep our fingers crossed, and I bet you the majority of them will bounce back to life. So hopefully that eliminates all the questions on winter damage, because we'll be talking about that here as we go through specific classes going into spring, okay? Now, real quick, I wanted to show you, if I pull my pruners out here, you know, just a couple basic things. We'll see some diagrams in the slideshow, but if I, you know, grab a random twig, this happens to be a little piece of PG hydrangea, the dead blossom has already been pruned off the end. But if we're going to talk just about a basic pruning cut, I can see on my plant here, I've got pairs of buds all up and down the stem. This is an opposite type bud plant. If I'm going to prune this back here for spring, I want to get my pruners just a ½ inch or an inch above that set of buds that I want to prune to, and make a nice clean cut at a 45-degree angle. Now I don't have a flat surface for water to sit on. I'll have 2 buds break. And for the one bloom on this particular hydrangea I had last year, now I'll have 2 stems come up and I'll have double the flower here for 2022. So PG hydrangea is a new wood blooming plant, just as an example of kind of, it's an easy one to me to see. If we cut that off and make the proper cut, we're going to have it heal right, and we're going to have excellent bud break. If I prune too close to the bud, that won't grow. The next one will, and now I'll be left with all these dead stubs in my plant, which is perhaps not the end of the world, but could be a spot where we might have some disease or something else coming as well, okay? So making a proper cut's a great way to go. Now, you saw me mention with the hydrangea, you know, if we kind of look at different plants in our yards, and we'll get to fruit here quick, is, you know, the stems. I have some plants that have opposite stems on both sides. I have other plants that are alternate. The buds will go back and forth if I look at it from left to right. So if I'm going to prune an opposite one, it's always easy above. If we pretend this hydrangea stem was maybe something like a rose, you know, if you look at your rose bush, you would see those buds on both sides of the cane. I'm going to try to cut to an outside bud that keeps my plant growing out and up versus growing back across. If I just walk out and shear something back with hedge clippers, chances are I'm going to have branches going everywhere. Some plants, we get away with that. Boxwoods, laurels, a lot of plants that have so many buds on the stem, it's not as particular. I'm not going to spend an hour out pruning my boxwood leaf by leaf. I'm going to shear it back, but I don't have that dead wood because there's so many buds on those stems. Chances are I cut right next to one, I have healthy growth, and the plant plops right back out, okay? So just keep in mind, opposite bud and alternate is one thing. The other big one today, and it has a lot to do with the fruit and the berry discussion, is old wood bloom versus new wood bloom. And simply that means if I take, let's just borrow a piece of this pear here. I borrowed from Steve's yard. Thank you, Steve. But if I have this piece of a pear tree here, I could follow my growth back. If I look what grew last year, okay, that's 1-year-old wood. Now I can go back another year and I could follow this branch's life going back for a number of years or the entire tree. So what we have to get used to, or you have to get used to as a gardener, is knowing the plants in your yard and which ones are going to bloom on new wood and which ones will only bloom and produce on old wood. So when we're talking about fruit and berries today, very few are going to produce on new growth. This will do nothing for me this season as far as me walking out and picking a delicious pear. The old wood will do all kinds of things for me. This is where I'll get my production. So running out and cutting off the growth every year is not the answer for the fruit or the berries. I can certainly keep it smaller, but if I don't leave 1-year-old wood to produce spurs and develop 2nd-year growth, then I'm going to break that cycle and not have a consistent crop to pick, okay? So try to think of the plants. Again, fruit is we'll get mainly on that here in a minute, but all the things in your yard. you know, from dogwood trees to forsythias to magnolias, so many plants. If you walked out right now today, looked at that plant, I'm going to see all the little buds on my magnolia tree ready to open here in 6 weeks. I'm going to see my forsythia branches loaded with buds. If I walk out in winter and prune, I'm not going to do any damage to my plant, but why would I have that forsythia, dogwood, magnolia, whatever it is, if I didn't want to enjoy the flowers? So that kind of gets to that prune after bloom. You want to wait till flowering occurs, then we can cut it back a bit, because now I can enjoy my full floral display, or again, for today, maximize our production, okay? So there's one. Now, to me, you know, going back for years, you know, we got to wintertime, you know, here in the Pacific Northwest, and it was always about, it's winter, we got to go prune our yard, we do everything in the winter. You know, I'm not here to tell you you have to go prune everything in your yard, or every fruit tree or berry for that matter. You would know better how your yard is in shape. But have a purpose is my reason. You know, that would be, you'll see in the slideshow some different purposes in the handout. You know, am I blocking a view? Do I want more fruit? Do I want more berries? Do I want more flower? Is it out of control? You know, has it not been touched for 10 years? I mean, there's a zillion reasons to walk out and do some pruning on the landscape. But maybe you keep up on it. And maybe not everything has to be done every year. You know, this is something that particularly with fruit and berries, I would check it every year. But general pruning, no, maybe we don't have to do it every season, but it maybe is every other season, okay? Now, if we talk just 2 basic rules, I'm gonna make you memorize today during the class. If you were here, I'd be the repeat after me guy. But if I was gonna give you 2 rules you're always kind of living by with pruning, it would be the 1/3 rule to me. If I want to cut something back substantially, I'm always okay going 1/3 in height or 1/3 in spread, and I probably will be okay. Going more than that, I'll raise my hand. I've done it before, as I'm sure many gardeners have, but you'll take a chance that plant doesn't come back quite as well, okay? So 1/3 rule is 1, and I said it once already, but prune after bloom. We'll just keep saying that today. Prune after bloom, make a song out of it or something, because that is a really good way to me as a homeowner gardener. Remember, okay, that magnolia just finished flowering. Now I'm okay to cut it back. I can regrow, set my flower buds in summer, and I have flowers again to enjoy the next season. Hopefully that kind of makes sense to everybody, okay? So kind of keep an eye on those 2 rules as we go. Now, give me 1 second here. There's a couple of slides here just to kind of show you a couple of the tools we talked about. Good pair of hand pruners, ratchet pruners, if you want something you can click and it's a little easier on the hand. There's a picture of the pole pruner on the garage floor. Good pair of loppers. Little giraffe pruner. Sometimes folks like those long reach ones. You can kind of reach out with the handle and click it. Good pair of head shears. Those are the same ones that I have in my garage. There's your sharpener from Zenport, and a nice folding saw. I think those are 2 most popular ones that I use in my yard here at the nursery and at the Arboretum when I help as well. So just a quick review as we look at different types of pruning. We're not talking about pinching things back today during the season. This is an annual kind of perennial thing. You know, shearing back, we're not going to prune evergreen stuff. We're not ready to do that here till we get towards the end of winter into early spring, but certainly shearing is one form of pruning. We're going to talk more about thinning and heading back today, you know, taking some pieces out of the center of a plant or heading them back to change the direction or control the height or the spread, okay? Now, if we look at a couple general rules there, general diagrams, you'll kind of see, looking out right now, our deciduous plants have no leaves. It's really easy to see some of the structure, you know, that we're looking at. So again, I showed you on that branch, we can look at primary growth or what grew last year, the year before, and we can kind of follow that pattern, and we can look at the buds on there, you know, a terminal bud where I'm going to get height, lateral buds where I'll create bushiness, but certainly give you an idea on where you can prune to on those specific plants. If you look on the right-hand diagram there, you know, you can kind of see just a basic plant structure. That could be a little young apple tree or a cherry or anything as we're talking fruit, and kind of where we're going to get the growth and how do we change the direction or the shape of that. I'm always looking at, you know, keeping my fruit trees a little bit on the lower side and more spreading, easier to pick, get more sun that way, and maybe not letting them get so high out of control. We'll talk in the fruit class about rootstocks and all kinds of fun stuff to help with that, but certainly pruning is going to be a major part on how we shape the production of our trees. You know, there's a picture, if you couldn't see, with me pruning there at the beginning on how to make a proper cut. You can see that could be a little rose cane, an apple tree, it could be really anything, but kind of how I want to make that that good cut on there, so that I've got a good chance to heal and a happy plant moving forward. Now there's a couple of diagrams kind of shaded there where you can see before and after. You know, a typical shade tree, you know, if we're talking fruit, that would be a little bit more upright, you know, maybe like a cherry, a plum, a peach, or maybe I have a few branches that are crossing. I'm not getting good sun, good air circulation. Winter's a great time to walk out and look at larger plants like that. Look up in the structure and decide what branches to thin out of the crown, and you can see the difference. So I haven't changed the overall outline of my tree. I haven't butchered it back. I'm not hacking it, which I see all over the place. Just thinning it out and making it more healthy. I'm going to get better light, better sun, less disease, and have a happier tree long term by thinning like that. The heading back, to me, is a lot like the fruit we're going to talk about today, where we've got more of that spreading kind of angular tree. Maybe I don't want so much height on it. Certainly if you do, we don't have to take the leader out, but if we can keep that tree down and more spreading, we're going to have again, easier to pick, better production, a much happier fruit tree long term. Now, if you have to walk out here, I know again with the snow we had, inevitably somebody's going to probably have a broken branch or two or something that might have come down. Be real careful when we're doing large limbs. You know, maybe you have inherited a house that has older fruit trees and you're wondering kind of how to get started. How do I get this big piece out of here? Always remember to cut up first, then cut down. Then your third cut will be to get right to the collar so that it heals properly. If I walk out and just start sawing a branch off, it's going to crack, peel, and I'm going to peel the bark off the side of my plant. That's like their skin. I know you wouldn't like someone to peel your skin off when they did some pruning. So try to go up, then cut, sever it, and then our third cut will be the one that gets it nice and tidy, okay? Now, if we look at multi-stem pruning, now, you know, we'll show you some specific blueberry, raspberry pictures here coming up, currants, many of the berries we'll talk about, but this essentially is the structure of a lot of the plants in our yards, whether it's other shrubs or edible things like today. If I look at that plant, I'm going to have a crowded base with multiple stems coming out. So this, I like this picture because I kept the brown wood and I cut the light out. I'm not, again, interested in heading it back and cutting off all my new growth from last year. I want to dive into the base and get some of those pieces totally out of there, open up the structure, and keep encouraging more fresh growth from the bottom up. That's going to give me a heavier producing berry going long term, okay? You know, there's one last one there with some tree issues, you know, again, maybe a little snow, a little damage. These are some things that I'll be watching for: crossing branches, broken tips, water sprouts, suckers, all those things that we see a lot of times on fruit trees. We can get in here right now in this late winter time and get some of that taken care of to get a head start for the coming season. Now there's the one you had to memorize. The 1/3 rule is the first one there. Pruning after bloom is always a good rule to live by to me. And again, have a reason, purpose, a view, too big, unhealthy, diseased, I want more fruit, I want more flowers. We can go on, but have a purpose in mind when you want to walk out and prune that particular plant. But always keep in mind, this time of year, we're going to attack structure issues and get our things cut back here as we get into early spring, to get them set for the season. Later in spring to early summer is when we want to start hitting a lot of the spring blooming plants and a lot of our evergreens. So we're not going to run out and do that just yet. Now I'll mention one thing here before we start looking into some of the fruit pictures is dormant spraying. Now, you know, I brought a bottle of both of these in. I'll show you again after class. They're on special this week for the class attendees. But if I had any problem with my fruit or my berry or any plant in my yard in 2021, I do the pruning, I get it cleaned up, I remove the old leaves at the base, I do all the cultural things that I can do to help start the next season clean. If I want to make sure that I've eradicated the bug, the disease, whatever it is, this I think is the best combination dormant spray out there now. Liquid Cop lasts for a very long time, even in the rain. It's an excellent spray for peach, cherry, plum, all the things that we're going to talk about today to help prevent disease or keep it to a minimum. The horticultural oil is a great organic way to coat everything. If I'm a twig and I spray oil, it's going to run and it's going to coat, and it essentially cuts off oxygen between the surface of my plant and the open air. So if I have bug eggs, fungus spores, anything that's kind of tucked in there that maybe I can't see, the dormant spray will really help with that with the oil. Now, if we have two, mix them both together. The disease is what I would worry about more on our wet Western Washington than bugs myself, but certainly doing both of those together is the optimal way to start clean as a dormant spray. Now, if we look at apples and pears first, so we're going to kind of start by calling this the spur fruits. So if I grab a piece of a pear, and apple look the same way, and again, I can look at last year's growth, I can follow this tree back. When I get into that second area, you put it up against something you can see here, I can see these spurs. If I'm growing fruit and I want to pick it and eat it, that is all that matters. I need to preserve my spurs. Excuse me. I would highly recommend that you go look up a spur, look at your tree, get real comfortable what they look like so that you can prune accurately. The spur is where I'm going to drop my cluster of flowers and get my fruit. So that is what I need to protect by pruning. So spur production, excuse me, apples and pears are the main two we'll talk about with this type of tree. Now, late winter, you'll see some notes on the slide there. I want to get out and try to thin my tree out. I want air, I want sun, I want movement through it. Will help with the disease, help with some problems, and open it up for sunlight. So all those spurs that drop blossoms, I'm going to have air and sun in there to ripen my fruit. So thinning it out is a great way to start. It doesn't have to be today, this weekend. You've got pretty much the rest of January into February where we can attack some of these things and get some of that done. Dead diseased wood always comes out. That's another one. Look at suckers and water sprouts. If you've got an old apple tree or a pear, you're probably looking at it being overwhelmed. How am I going to get this thing back into shape? Because it has sent so much growth vertically straight to the sunshine. So I want to make sure, excuse me, I want to make sure that I can control the growth by cutting back those suckers. Going in every winter and sawing them all off is not the answer. We would saw off most of them, leave a few that we can shorten that will develop into new growth and develop spurs. We talked about the spurs being developed on 2-year-old wood. If you read your sheet there, it'll tell you that again. If I go in and just cut all my 1-year-old wood off every season, I have no 2-year-old wood. I'm not going to get spurs, and I'm going to cease or minimize my production. So make sure you look at those suckers as, okay, I'm getting rid of most of you, but I'm going to leave one here and one there and one here that are going the right direction that I can cut down to 3 or 4 buds and develop the next layer of structure of the apple or the pear to continue to pick fruit the next season as well, okay? So, that's one thing that's a little tough, I think, for some people with apples and pears. You can always come down and ask. We can show you some trees here at the property, but you've got to think of this as a 3-year process. And that's why I said cutting off all the 1-year-old wood is going to minimize your production. We have to let these develop a season. The second season, they develop the spurs. The third year, they drop clusters of flowers, and I get to pick my fruit. So by cutting them back every season, we can keep them growing slow and steady and maximize our production, okay? Think of it now. We just got our, 1,200 fruit trees in yesterday. We'll start planting them next week and have them hopefully out by next week, in about a week or so, ready to go. But if I buy a young tree and I'm going to add a fruit tree to my landscape or add to my orchard, I think you would be shocked how far I tell the staff to cut trees back around here. You might end up with a 6-7 foot tree for sale here that we would try to take 2 or 3 feet off of it now. We want to get all that growth cut down, create secondary branching, and sacrifice while it's young for a year or two to develop some good structure, and then I've got a much better tree long term, okay? You know, I mentioned once already, maybe you're battling an old one. You know, I'm not going to lie, you know, I've seen some old fruit trees in my day. You know, that could be an overwhelming vision if you're standing there going, where do I even start with this? You know, that's something, again, bring some pictures, ask some questions. We can help you rejuvenate that thing. But I would always cut it way back. You know, plants are resilient creatures and fruit trees are included in that. If I've got a mess, you know, let's really get it compassed back hard and let it start over again. Maybe I don't have apples or pears for a season or two, but then in 3 or 4 years, okay, now I've got a tree I can work with again that we can get done. You got an old apple, I can guarantee you're going to be doing a lot of thinning out and getting rid of some limbs, and then you're going to probably have sucker growth, you know, 12 or 15 feet to the sky, and you're going to be removing a lot of it, but we can kind of, again, press the reset button and get that structure better for the long term, okay? The last one I put on there for apple and pears is Espaliers. You know, that's a little bit different way to grow fruit. If you don't know that, we're training them along horizontaling and not letting them get up necessarily. We have a couple beautiful Espaliers here Steve planted on the property years ago. We can show you how we do it. We sell them here at the nursery, but that's a way you're almost, to some extent, bonsaiing, you know, a fruit tree. You know, you're causing it to grow laterally, keeping the buds really short. So I'm getting a lot of fruit production. We get a bunch on Espalier, but I'm not letting it get up and out of control. You know, to me, if you drive over Eastern Washington these days and go look at, I don't care if it's cherries or peaches or plums or apples or pears or anything, you know, they're almost doing this to all the fruit these days because I can keep it more manageable, easier to pick, don't take up as much room, and I get heavy production on a properly espaliered fruit tree for sure, okay? So a couple pictures there, you know, and again, this is recorded. You can go back and look at these slides at your convenience, but that essentially is my apple branch. You know, if I want to look at the structure, you can look at the bud, the different types of buds on there and look back at how that tree grows. You can see, you know, again, primary growth. I don't have any fruit set on last year's wood. I go to the 2-year-old wood and I can see some of that spur development starting to happen. That's where I'm going to get my cluster. So I guess in a nutshell, what I'm telling you is with these apple branches, you know, don't go out and cut the last year's growth off it every season. You can cut that back quite a bit, but again, leave 3 or 4 buds of last year's growth, prune to that point where I can branch out and stay at the right angle and going out from the center, and I'm going to have a nice tree. Now I've got 1-year-old wood that drops the spurs next year, and we can keep that cycle going. I hope that makes sense to everybody. You know, same thing with the pear there, you know, apples and pears, both the spur fruits. You can kind of see the old school diagrams there where, again, I'm starting it young, I'm training a leader, I'm taking it back out, I'm keeping that structure going side to side versus going so far up. So that'd be a good little tip for you, again, kind of starting them out. Now, if we talk next about stone fruits. So when we say stone fruits, you know, kind of think of it, anything's got a pit in the middle, you know, a cherry, a peach, a plum, a nectarine, an apricot. You know, we kind of would treat all these a little bit the same, you know, because these kind of grow the same. We have the same pruning principles for all these types of stone fruits. So again, we're going to prune the lateral buds if we look at those branch diagrams and try to keep our tree spreading and not going upright so much. You know, if you want to make it easier to pick, we want to keep it down a bit. This is the time of year. To me, these are the types of fruits that are probably a little bit more disease prone in wet springs. So for sure, we're going to dormant spray these types of trees. For sure, we're going to want to do some thinning and even heading back on some of the twig growth. All of my problems with the peach tree, you know, as an example, are going to occur at the tips of the branches and then work their way down through the wood. So if I go out, you know, in early mid-February or late January here, and I do some heading back of some of that top growth, thin it out a little bit, I'm going to have much healthier bud break and a better chance of having success growing through that season, okay? So same thing, we're going to look to thin it out, remove dead diseased wood, head back, you know, maybe in the summer, any excess growth, we can work on heading that back again. But you'll see in particular, to me, the peach, the nectarine, the apricot, excuse me, are a little bit different creatures because of them being prone to a little bit of peach leaf curl. So if I look out, I guess 20%. If you went out here on a sunny day, we got a sunny day today, and got up there in the crown and cut back about 20% and shaved off all those tips, you're going to have, again, much better bud break, much better chance, especially if followed up by a spray by that liquid cop. We get that copper fungicide on there, and we would have much better chance of starting off the spring nice and clean. And no different than pears and apples. Sacrifice when it's young. Peaches, plums, all this stuff wants to grow straight up for the sunshine when they're young. And if we can get these cut back young and get them branching and growing side to side, we're going to have a much nicer tree long term. So if I look at a cherry, the biggest difference with these types of trees, I don't have to wait 3 years. It's on the second year growth. So if I have a cherry branch and I look at what grew last year, those are not quite yet opening, but you're going to have flowers down all that 1-year-old wood. You can see the bud clusters sitting on a cherry right now in the snow in the winter. You can see that on plum, on peach, all these trees. You can see your flower buds from last year's growth that will bloom and produce fruit this season. So again, we're not going to walk out and just cut or try a tree back. We want to leave last year's growth or cut part of it off, again, to a bud that's going a direction that I want it to go. We look at the bud structure on the right there and prune above that. Now I get some bloom and some production, but now as it grows for next year's wood, I'm still going up at a nice angle from side to side. That's going to keep my tree going the shape that I want long term. So you can kind of see on the left there, the actual picture, that line with the arrow on it. That's the line between that 2-year-old wood and last year's growth. You can see on the 2-year-old wood, I've got clusters ready to go, a little bit more production. But even on that 1-year-old wood, I'm going to have flower blossoms open on those, and I'll get some fresh cherries or plums or peach, whatever it is that's on last year's growth as well. Okay. There's kind of an example, a couple diagrams of some peaches and plums there. Again, you can see the structure. I think that peach tree one's great because that's exactly how they grow. Having had one growing up, having had them over the years. We had one here at the property for a long time as well, at the nursery. But that is essentially how peach is going to grow. And you can see where we've kind of marked there where I would cut and thin and keep that structure open, get rid of the suckers at the base, open that thing up. The more sun, the more air I can get going through a tree like peach in particular, or apricot nectarine the same way, I'm really going to have a much happier plant as we go through the growing season. The plum is a great picture as well, because that's really what plum's going to do. If you don't prune plum, you're going to get shoots that go up 4, 5, 6 feet, and then another 6 feet, and it's never going to end. So if we can walk out in the winter, cut some of that back to a reasonable point, let them bloom, get some production early summer. These trees and cherries as well absolutely would walk out when I pick the fruit in early, mid, late summer and look at the structure. And maybe I can take again some of that sucker growth down to 3 or 4 buds to set the structure for the next season. That way I'm kind of a little bit ahead of the game. Most of these, maybe it's a little bit of winter thinning, and then I'm also out there early summer just kind of watching to see how it responded so that I can correct any issues. Now, if we shift gears real quick, we're doing okay on time. I'll get going here. So if we shift gear for berries here for a second, blueberries is a common plant that almost everybody's got going here in our local area. We're not going to ever walk out to me and shear a blueberry back. Yes, the plant will grow, but as we look at a picture here on the next slide, again, all of my flowering is occurring on that 1-year-old wood. So if I go out and shear it back to control the size, I'm going to cut off the majority of my production for the season and get minimal blueberries. We want to go down and remove all the growth down to the base. You'll see in the picture, but think of that multi-stem diagram we looked at. If I look at that blueberry with 80 branches going up in a big vase shape, I'm going all the way to the ground with my little pocket saw or my loppers, and I'm trying to get 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces entirely out of the center of that thing and open the whole plant up. Now I'll get fresh growth, get some new suckers off the root system. It'll fill right back in, but now I'm maximizing my production, getting sun, getting air, less disease, and going to have, again, a happier blueberry down the road. The one exception is probably the evergreen blueberries. And I mentioned on there, they're pretty popular up here these days. You know, I'm not, again, going to probably thin those out or have to cut them back as much because they don't get as big. But that's one I'd look at more in summer. You know, if I do some picking on it or a little light pruning here and there, that's fine. But if I get to summer, maybe I could do a little bit of shearing on some of those and still have enough season to regrow, set my flowering wood that I can pick again the coming season as well. So if you look at the two blueberry pictures there, you know, there's buds. You know, if I take a little snip of the top of a blueberry branch, that's where all my flowering is going to happen in my picking for the season. So again, shearing them or heading them back to me is not the answer. It's the right hand picture there where I look at an old blueberry before pruning with all that structure, and then you can see I've dived in at the base and just taken entire old pieces out. Sometimes on my own blueberry, I'll be out in the summer enjoying the picking here in July, and I'll take a little piece of flagging tape and even tie it on a piece that I picked a lot of berries off of in the center. That, man, that's an old piece of wood in there. Let me remember to go back this winter and take that out so that I can, again, keep some fresh wood coming up that will continue to produce. Now, if we look at raspberries real quick, you know, the first step with raspberries is you've got to decide if you have June or everbearing. That's going to make all the world of difference on how we attack the pruning on a raspberry. You know, raspberries that you pick once a year, June bearing. You know, if you have one that you pick a little bit in June and then you pick again mid-late summer, early fall, you probably have an everbearing one. This is the same discussion we've been having with a lot of plants today, that old wood versus new wood. If I have an old wood on a raspberry, that's an everbearing one, that's what produces me the crop the next spring. If I have new wood that comes out during the summer, that produces me the late crop on the everbearing raspberries. So June bearing raspberries only produce on last year's growth, old wood. If I have everbearing, I get kind of the best of both worlds, and I can kind of pick and choose when I prune accordingly, okay? So you'll see in the picture on the next one, but if I have a raspberry row, it's kind of the same as the blueberry. I want to go all the way to the base, and I want to take out a lot of the old stems. If I am getting too tall, out of control, I certainly can head those back a little bit. But if I'm going to take an old woody raspberry row, I want to get rid of probably a third to a half of what is growing out of the ground and let fresh stuff come off the root system that I'll keep training and growing for years down the road. So think of the wintertime here as a good time to thin out your rows and get some of those oldest pieces totally out of there at the soil level, and then look at what's left and maybe head back some of the longest pieces a bit just to control the size. But if you're going to walk out and just, you know, cut the whole row at 3-4 feet off the ground, that's not the answer. We would want to cut some all the way out and leave some a little bit taller so that we get to enjoy some picking this coming season, okay? June ones, you could always cut back real hard when you pick. So if you have the one crop a year that produces on old growth, right when you're out there picking them in June, again, tie a flag on it, do what you got to do, that we could take that old stuff out of that row immediately, get fresh stuff off the root system over the summer, and then I'm good to go for 2023 again. So again, just an old school shade diagram there. So I've got a little row trained out. You know, maybe you have braces on yours, maybe you don't, but this one has a nice little corral to keep them contained a little bit. But you can see again what's dark I've left, what's shaded I haven't. Look at the amount of canes we've gotten out of there, because again, sun, air, I want all that to have healthy plants, and I want to keep fresh growth coming off the root system. That's what a raspberry does. It runs, it suckers, and I want to make sure that keeps happening. So watch your pruning in that regard. Now, brambles is a little bit the same. This is where I'm afraid maybe we get a few gardeners confused, because this is a lot the same discussion as raspberries. But if you kind of remember two words today when we're talking about brambles and raspberries, it's primal cane and flora cane. And it's the same fancy name for 1-year-old wood and new growth for the season. Okay. So if you think of it in those terms, I hope you can remember, but it makes all the world of difference with the brambles and including the raspberries on how we prune. So if you kind of read through that, there's a lot of information in your sheet as well. You know, we want to follow principles with these to get the most production we can. You know, old floral cane wood on a boysenberry, a tayberry, a marionberry, all the different types of berries that are brambles that we grow is done. You know, if you picked a bunch of fruit and you're out there looking at your row and you're seeing the dried remnants of past flowers and berries on there, go to the ground and take that piece out. You're done with it. It did its business. You picked its fruit. You said thank you. Let's move on for the next season. Okay. So we get rid of the old floricanes that are done. Last year's wood has now become our floral canes. So now that's where I'm going to get the clusters of flowers, the production that I want on the last season's growth. So essentially, if I picked it last year, I'm done with it. You can pick it, cut it out right then. I don't care. But if you haven't, do it this winter. And again, that keeps things coming off the root system. So we keep that cycle going of the primal canes to the floral canes. We remove them and we just keep that cycle going year after year to get the production that we want. Okay. So really tough one to talk about in Zoom. It's a little easier if we were here, we could do some pruning on them, but I hope that makes sense. Certainly ask some questions if it didn't. You know, there's some pictures there that might help a little bit. I don't think people prune their brambles enough. You know, I really don't, because you leave that thorny mess in there. You got to put body armor on to dig in there and pick your berries. Get some of that wood out of the way. Open up the structure. Get better sun. You got a happier plant. You're going to make your life easier when it comes to picking time too. You know, keep in mind, you know, most times we keep brambles maybe down a little bit lower versus raspberries a little taller. So with brambles in particular, if we cut out all those pieces that we picked last year, those old floral canes that are done, say goodbye to those. I can keep my primocanes, and I don't necessarily have to keep 3-4 feet of wood. If you want to tidy it down a little bit, head them back a little bit, you know, a few buds, and get the structure down. I still have plenty of wood that's going to produce the flower and give me the berries that current season. Okay. Now, just a couple left here, and we'll get done. I'm probably, because of my computer problem, probably a little late today. But grapes is a big one too. I think a lot of homeowners grow grapes these days. We'll do a little bit of this at the grape class, but certainly pruning, you know, I always kind of smile when I see a grape, because I don't know that there's a plant that looks deader in the wintertime than an old grapevine. I mean, you look at that grape, like, seriously, that's going to grow next year? You can hardly even see the buds on a grape typically. They do look dead as a doornail here in the middle of winter. But if you think of, you know, to me, there's two gardeners that are doing grapes. You want to pick them, you want to make wine or juice or whatever your thing is, great. You're growing them for production. Other people like grapes as a vine. It's a big leaf, gets great fall color. They want to cover a structure, an arbor. You know, those are the two extremes to me. If you're, you know, pruning to cover something, ignore everything I tell you here for the next 5 minutes, because you don't want to cut it back hard. You want to leave the wood and let it grow and cover your structure, and you're happy. If you're pruning, if you're planting grapes and growing them because you want to pick table grapes or wine grapes or whatever it is, you know, think of the vineyards. Everybody's driven around and seeing them all trained out. They're never very big. They're pruned really hard every year, because if I look at a grape, I don't want all that stringy, wispy growth. You know, I want to cut it back to have old wood, 3 or 4 bud sections on my arms. That is where I'm going to get flowering and large clusters to develop. It's never going to happen on all that stringy growth that takes off, because grapes of vine, if you keep them happy and feed them and water them and all that, you're going to have a lot of growth a year. Don't be bashful about pruning them back. This is another one I don't think a lot of folks maybe do enough pruning on. We can really cut the grapes back, help them produce more, and keep our plants much, much smaller as well. Kiwis are almost the same discussion as grapes. If you're growing kiwi vine, you know, this is a creature that probably would put on, you know, 8 or 10 feet of growth on a good gardening season. I don't think anybody wants a kiwi to bury their house. They're usually out, you know, training them out on a structure or somewhere, maximum sun. The one difference I would say with the kiwi is be real careful how early you do it. I would not attack a kiwi in the middle of winter. I would wait till we get towards the late winter, early spring, when the hard frost is kind of done, especially with fuzzy kiwis. We want to protect that wood and make sure we don't have any damage if we do get a late cold spell. So maybe put the kiwi prune on hold and attack it more like, you know, early, mid-March, late March, kind of depending on what the weather does. Still got plenty of time. Just keep in mind, it's the same discussion. If we can prune all that, I kind of like removing anything less than a pencil. You know, on a kiwi, I want to open it up. I can certainly cut it back. They grow very fast. They'll recover. You know, give them some room to grow. This is one we'll need some space. Maybe you won't have to prune quite as much, okay? You know, currants is the last one here. You know, and I don't have a good picture of currants, but if you're growing currants, you know, a lot of twigs, it's a big deciduous plant. Again, all the berry production is on 1-year-old wood from last year. That's what's going to bloom and produce. But this is another one. Don't be bashful with pruning of the currants. If you're growing them to make some jam or some jelly, or you like eating them, it's a really easy plant, easy berry to grow, but certainly thinning it out. Again, big chunks out of the base. Old wood gets removed. Currant always has a tendency to kind of lop out and hang a little bit. Pruning those bottom branches up will keep that kind of from hugging the ground too much, and I can keep my structure a little bit more upright. When you get to summertime, we would have those super long shoots that come out of currants. You know, maybe we don't want that height. We would follow it down again and cut those back above a bud so we can branch and develop some more structure for the next season. So kind of maybe a little bit of wintertime thinning is the way to go, and then a little bit of heading back when we get into that early summertime period would be an ideal way to go with the currant. Oh, I forgot one more, huckleberries. Now everybody's growing huckleberries. I've got both in my yard. I love some huckleberries. Lots of ice cream, I have to admit. Red huckleberries are our deciduous ones. We would find these out growing in our native woods and old stumps. I got one in my yard. I love it. They're a little tartar. You know, those are different. That blooms on, again, last year's growth. So I'm not going to go out and cut my huckleberry back so hard in winter when I'm out there picking it in early summer, or my two sons are picking all mine. Then I'm going to cut it back, because then I can get, again, summer growth, 1-year-old wood, bloom, and I'm right back in business for 2023. Evergreen huckleberry is a little bit different. Now that's going to bloom on current season's growth, believe it or not, coming out in more on the summer to early fall. So I don't have a problem with you waiting on being evergreen. We're not going to do it in the winter, but let's say we get to like April 1st or so, I could certainly, you know, cut back some sprays on my evergreen huckleberry. Some people don't even care about the berries. It's a pretty plant. You know, we shear it, you know, kind of into a hedge or to control it. But as long as I leave that fresh growth that pops out, I'm going to get some flowering on there and have those little delicious dark black blue berries to enjoy when we get towards late summer into fall, okay? Now, real quick, before we do some tidying up here, I just put this out here. You probably saw Nicole's been super busy getting all of our wonderful classes up on the internet for 2022. We're doing them in chunks so that you don't forget about all the cool ones coming in summer. So we've got most of spring up so far. I just wanted to highlight these two that I'll be teaching here in the coming weeks, because this is kind of phase one. I split out pruning this year a little bit to hopefully help, but we'll be talking about growing all these types of fruits, selecting the right ones for you, both fruits and berries here, coming up on classes real quick. 2 weeks from today, fruit class, then another 2 weeks on Valentine's weekend. You come down here and buy your sweetie a blueberry or a strawberry or something instead of roses. So we'll have berries going here as well. 2 very popular classes. We'll have a lot of good inventory in and some great sales going for us as well, okay? So thanks for doing this. There's our website information. Email if you want to email questions. I'm here all weekend. I bet you the Master Steve got most of them while I was blabbling here for the last 45 minutes. But if you got some more, you can certainly email us anytime. It's really hard doing this Zoom, I'll be honest. Pruning's a tough one to do online, and try to find some pictures and do a little cutting and this and that. I hope you got some tips out of it, but certainly maybe emailing a picture, bringing down a sample, come down and talk to me. We can always try to help solve your problem. Most of them are going to be I just bought this house. Look at this tree. How do I get it fixed? You know, we can maybe start helping to get down that road. Okay. Give me 1 second here. All right. So let me tell you a couple. I'll remind you, kind of knowing your yard. We're getting towards spring. The weather's beautiful today. And I hope you remember the 2 rules today, because I really try to live by the 1/3 rule and prune after bloom. Knowing your yard, old and new wood, is a huge deal, whether we're talking fruit today, again, dogwood, cherry, we go on and on, the entire landscape. If you know which of your plants blooms on last year's growth versus which ones bloom on this year's growth, that's really going to help you dictate on when and how easy it is to prune a lot of things, okay? The dormant sprays, like I mentioned, come in this week. We've got sales going, 20% off, port oil, liquid cop. We've got plenty of both in the store. This is something you can put on everything in your yard: fruit trees, roses, berries, anything you want to protect or that you certainly had issues with last year. That's going to be a huge help moving into spring weather here as we start to break bud again. I brought in Mr. West, our POS master program, is in here today. So these are our winter gloves. Now, we've always had these orangey ones. If you're local here, you probably have some, and you're like, ooh, those are warm and dry. So let's call these warm and dry. We've got these on special, 20% off. They're insulated, totally coated with rubber. This is a great winter glove if it's wet and cold. If you're like me, big hands, and I'm usually pretty warm anyway, I like just the dry without the warm. So the blue ones are brand new this year. We found these to add in. Again, 20% off. That's a great glove to have around. We got all sizes, even up to XXL for the big paws, right? Last thing, so 20% off dormant, 20% off gloves. All the pruning supplies here at the store. So the sharpeners, loppers, we've got pole saws, we got all of it here. A really good selection, hand pruners, all the stuff you could imagine. Come on down this week and do some shopping. You got 20% all that all the way through Friday. Simply show up at the register. I was at Trevor's pruning class. I stuck through them for 45 minutes of yelling and screaming. Give him my 20%. I should get paid back for that class. So there you go. There's your payback, 20%. All right. So let's see if is there anything left, Nicole, or did Steve get them all?
He's been answering a lot. You all have had some really good questions. Yeah, his fingers have been going really quick. But there's some good ones. So just to kind of have you clarify for us out loud, Steve's been kind of doing it behind the scenes, but so you've talked about pruning after blooms and also pruning now. Can you, it's a little confusing. Can you clarify like what we should be doing, when, how do they work together?
Well, and again, it to me, it all has to do with that old wood flower versus new wood flower. So all these plants, all fruit we talked about and berries are old wood bloomers. Let's just kind of set that aside for a minute. Maybe we talk about some things most people have in their yard. Let's say I have a forsythia, again, a magnolia, a dogwood, a flowering cherry. I could go on and on. All those plants had their branches grow last year, set flower buds that I get to enjoy this year. So that's when it comes to the timing to me, is if I can walk out and cut my flowering cherry back right now, it's not going to hurt the plant. But if I head it back and cut it down, I cut off all my flowers for the season. I want that cherry because I'd like to see some flower power here in February and March. So prune after bloom. If I let it bloom, walk out there and do whatever you want to. It's spring, early summer, cut it back, thin it out, do all this, and you're going to have a happier plant year to year to year. I would think of the winter, I tried to say this a couple of times, maybe if we do it this way, if we think about the winter, to me, is a time to fix structure. If I look up at my cherry tree again as an example, and I've got crossing branches, I've got something that's half broken, it's growing lopsided, whatever the reason is, I can attack structure issues here when I don't have any leaves in my way. I can walk out there and look up and go, I can see the problem. Let me get this fixed. Now, after we flower, if we're going to try to head it back or cut it back to control the size, now I'm not going to sacrifice the flower, the fruit, the berry, any of that by doing it after it blooms. Does that not help a little bit?
Yeah, it does make sense. For us that aren't as well versed in doing this year after year, it makes sense to kind of lay it out like that. So thank you.
Well, again, I always kind of chuckle with every class. I mean, gardening is is the ultimate trial and error excursion. Just because we know something means somebody 10, 50, 100 years ago made a bad mistake. Plants will always recover. I mean, I'm being honest. I've seen some brutal plants and brutal pruning in my lifetime. It's like, that's not going to look real nice, but it's not going to die. So, trial and error at your yard, maybe a little bit. Call us, if you're not sure. The biggest thing, again, is that old versus new wood. And if you have a plant, you're not sure what it is, what does it do? We can play 20 questions and probably figure out what you have and then give you the proper advice. Because as a gardener, not just working here and teaching your classes in my own yard, I have plants because I want to see a flower. I want to get my berries. I want to get my fruit. I don't want to prune to prohibit that from happening. So if we teach you a little bit, about different things, I think again, your life will be a little easier in the garden.
Excellent. So we've got some questions about some kind of other berries like gooseberries, mulberries, honeyberries. What are some tips on all those?
Honestly, I thought about we could have had probably 15 sections on that berry. Then you would have had a 10-page handout. But all those things you just mentioned, literally all of them are exactly like the blueberry discussion. I mean, if I'm looking at an old plant, all those bloom on 1-year-old wood, I want to thin it out in the winter, take old pieces out, open it up, get things off the ground, whatever's to your liking. I'm not going to go out and shear or head back as much because that's going to eliminate, again, that 1-year-old wood that would bloom and give me my crop for that season. So all those things you mentioned exactly the same way as the currant and the blueberry. We want to thin out that old wood, get it out of there, keep fresh growth coming in, that I keep the cycle going down long term.
Cool. Here's a question that's a little bit contradictory to what we're talking about, but instead of pruning for more production, what if you have huge fruit trees like apples or pears and and you want to get less product? What do you do about that?
Well, again, it's kind of what I mentioned earlier. You inherited an old tree, where do I start? You could cut that thing so far back. Maybe it's a 2-year process. Go down a third, go in a third, take huge limbs out, remove a bunch of that stuff. You won't get much maybe that next year. And then the next year we go a little farther. And then you will win down the road. You can keep it down. Our family had a place in Cleellum for 30 years. We planted fruits. I had 40 fruit trees over there, and every single one of them, when talking apples mainly, I could get on a little 2-step ladder and pick every single apple off of it. You didn't need to get a picker and a giant orchard ladder because we kept things pruned down and more of a spreading shape. So try, maybe that route, maybe a little bit easier.
Good to know. What about figs? People have a lot of questions about pruning those.
Again, fig, I'll be honest, I would expect maybe a little bit of the figs to have some damage here coming out of winter with how cold we got. So watch that. First of all, if you got stuff that doesn't leaf out, cut it off. It'll always grow off the roots and some will take off. But we need that old wood to produce. So fig is a pretty fast grower. I would wait till we're done with frost myself to do much pruning on fig. So maybe it's a late March, mid-late March kind of time frame. And again, thinning it out. I want sun. We can certainly cut fig down if it's gotten out of control. You're still going to have plenty of wood to produce. Fig is kind of a weird creature because if you had fig, they're probably like, yeah, I know what he means, because I'll get some bloom and some production on old wood, but you've seen most figs will get 2 crops around here if we get a decent summer. So that's kind of one, you get a little bit of both, cutting a bunch of wood out here in late winter, early spring. Maybe I don't have as many figs earlier in the gardening season, but I'm going to be rewarded maybe a little bit later, if that makes sense.
So quick jump back to the pruning for less fruit. Would you advise the same thing if it's on an espalier and not a traditional upright?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, espalier, I don't mean torture in a bad word, but you're literally torturing that little tree into the shape you want it to be. And they don't mind, trust me, they're not getting upset. But yeah, I've seen some espaliers that you couldn't tell were espaliers anymore. And I'm guessing maybe that's where they're at, where it's like, wow, what happened to my layers? I've got it climbing and it looks like a rainbow tree, like my little brother did with his little pear years ago. I went fixed. Don't be bashful. Saw some wood out. It's always going to grow. But, you know, again, maybe that one year you're like, okay, I'm really pruning this back hard. I can live with a little less fruit here for this season. And then boom, next year back in business and we start to get the structure back the way we want. You know, we go through our two. Espaliers is, like I said, a different creature. You're more than welcome to come down here. I'll show you, or the staff will show you on ours. It's been the same size. This is my 11th year, excuse me, running this place. I'm pretty sure Steve planted it a number of years before I got here. And it's exactly the same size as it was when I started here, because we go through in the winter, tidy it up. We go through in the summer and tidy it up one more time. It doesn't take hours, it takes a few minutes both times, but we do that twice a year to keep it perfectly in check like it is.
Gotcha. You mentioned the hort oil and liquid cop. Do you do that right after pruning? When and how often do you apply those?
You know, let's kind of take it as two. So again, I would mix both together if you want to get everything, bug disease all at once. The copper in particular is more for disease. And if you're going to do one, I highly recommend you do that one for sure. That's the reason we carry that copper and really no other for dormant is that's a different complex of copper and it lasts for about 30 days, even in the rain. So if I walk out and get on a 30-day schedule, you know, maybe it's mid-February, mid-March, mid-April, I'm going to keep my peach, my cherry, my plum, all that stuff pretty clean. Even if my neighbor doesn't and it blows back right onto my tree, I've kind of got shields up essentially with copper where I coat the buds and I've got a little longer action on it. So again, how long, you know, I don't know if I could tell you how many times you should spray, but if you've got, you know, good sun, good air circulation, you prune properly as I smile, and you've got it in shape, you know, I bet you if you did this once a month until we got dried out, hopefully that's by May, but say it's not till June, you know, if we get on kind of a 30-day schedule, I think you keep it pretty clean. You know, both these things we sell as dormant spray, but another reason I like them is because I can use both of those products all through the growing season, except when it's 90 degrees. Now, I don't know about you, Nicole, but how many days was it 90 degrees in Marysville, Washington last year? I could probably count them on one hand, not even two. So I, you know, avoid August, and I don't think anybody's out spraying in August anyway. All through the spring, early summer, and the fall, the winter, those same things we can use during all those time periods.
Gotcha. Can you remind us when we want to cut out or prune blueberry shoots?
Yeah. Well, again, you know, I like to do it here late winter. I mean, I don't have a problem if you rewind to last summer and you were out picking and you were like, whoa, that's a really old piece. Let's just get that out of there. That's fine. But if you haven't done it, look out, not so much up here. Look at the bottom of it here this winter. I've got old corky wood that's crowded out. You want to get some of that sawed out. Not every one of them, but maybe I take, you know, I've got maybe 7 large canes. I take 3 out of there and I keep room for all that fresh growth to continue that I get to pick the next year. So I would always try to get at that here before they break bud. I mean, it doesn't need to be today, this weekend, anytime here before we start getting into early March.
What about persimmons, specifically the Fuyu?
Yeah, same thing. You know, I would not be getting a persimmon anytime in winter. That's another one that's a little less hardy as far as temperature. I don't want to open up wood. So I'm going to get towards that tail end of winter after her last hard frost. And the same principles apply. You know, persimmon blooms and fruits on 1-year-old wood. So I'm not going to head back a whole lot. I'm going to check structure issues, crossing branches, get all that done. And then as I get my growth that season, I could certainly take some of those back down to keep the tree smaller long term.
Cool. What about pollinating apple, well, any kind of fruit tree, pollinators versus the fruit bearing kind? Do you prune them all the same? Are there differences between what their uses are?
No, same use. I mean, I'm not sure what they mean by pollinator tree. Maybe they've got one tree they could care less if it produces apples and they've only got one they pick. But you would get, with all the fruit, we'll talk about at the class on the 29th is how we get into this discussion about pollination. You know, if I have 2 different apples, they cross-pollinate, I have fruit on both. So I'm going to treat them both the same. If I'm not sure what they mean by pollinating tree, maybe they've got, again, one they don't care about. If you're doing it just for the pollinators, I would say don't prune it as much because I want maximum flower in February, March, whenever it is, to attract the mason bees into my yard to go hit my other fruit trees. Maybe that's what they mean by that. So I would stick with prune after bloom only if you've got another a blooming tree you're trying to get the bees in with. The two cherries that mix, or the apples or the pears or whatever other fruit, we would treat those exactly the same.
Somebody's asking, when do you prune a Satsuma?
Satsuma plum? Yeah, same thing. I mean, that's in that stone fruit category. You can look at the verbiage on the slide. This is again recorded. You can go back and check it out. But the Satsuma plum, again, you're probably the next month, 6 weeks. You know, typically by mid-February, plums are breaking bud pretty early. So in the next month, you know, try to get out there and get your thinning and your structure pruning done. Again, keeping in mind, all the plums and the bloom you're going to get is on that 1-year-old wood and older. So we're not going to severely cut it back. We can be a little more selective on what we want to head back in the late winter here.
And I know that this is specific to pruning, but we always get other questions about berries. So just a quick general, when's the best time to transplant, whether it's a bush, a berry bush, or a fruit tree?
You know, anytime. Fruit tree, berry, hosta, hellebore, lawn, I don't care what you're talking about. If you're moving a plant, we want to do that during the dormant season. So you've got probably still another two months of time here. Today's a nice day to do some transplant. The sun's out and the soil's nice and wet. So anytime when they're dormant, I don't like moving things during the growing season nearly as much, maybe for emergency use only if you got to take it. But if you're going to divide, transplant, relocate anything, you know, I try to get it done by 1st of March, probably would be about my deadline.
I think we covered most of it. We covered a lot of ground today. We appreciate you sticking with us for all these questions. If we didn't get to your question, we apologize. Feel free to send us an email like Trevor mentioned earlier. We love talking about all of this, and we're happy to continue to discuss your specific issues. You know, like he mentioned, if it's concerns before you start pruning, what's going on with your specific variety or situation, whatever, we're happy to help. So give us a call or an email. And like he mentioned before, we're going to have those specific fruit tree class and then the berry class, you know, in the next few weeks. So you can look forward to those and get, you know, a whole different world of information than what we just covered here today. We'll be posting this class later today up on our website as well as up on YouTube. So if you want to go back and catch the slides, slow down, all of that, you can do that kind of at your own pace. Makes gaining that information a little bit easier. We're really excited that it's the new year. We're happy that you joined us. You know, I know a lot of you might not be from the Pacific Northwest, but we appreciate you joining us, and a lot of this information can be used in other parts of the country too. If you're local, thanks for joining us. We hope to see you here in the nursery. Now that there's some nice sunny days out, we can get outside and enjoy the weather. So thanks for joining us. We're going to be kicking off classes pretty much every weekend, every other weekend. So we hope to see you back again. Check out our website to get the full list of what's coming up next. And thanks so much. We'll see you later.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you up here at the nursery soon. Enjoy the sunshine today.